The cleaning lady gave water to a Hell's Angel, but when it showed up at the party, everyone was show. Elena pushed her heavy cart through the deserted corridors of the Grand Assembly Hall, the squeak of its wheels the only sound echoing in the cavernous space. It was past 3 in the morning, and the last vestiges of the night's glitzy charity gala had long since faded, replaced by the stark reality of discarded champagne flutes, confetti dust, and the lingering scent of stale perfume mixed with expensive liquor. For Elena, this was her world, a twilight existence spent erasing the excesses of others, making everything pristine again before the dawn brought new faces and new demands. She was a ghost, a phantom presence working diligently in the shadows, rarely seen, almost never acknowledged. Her uniform, a simple gray smock and practical trousers, blended into the muted tones of the service areas, making her almost invisible. Elena was a woman in her late 40s, her hands calloused from years of scrubbing, her shoulders perpetually aching from the weight of her responsibilities. A single mother, she juggled 2 cleaning jobs and a part-time shift at a local diner, all to keep her son, Matteo, in a decent school and to afford the mounting medical bills for her aging mother. Sleep was a luxury she rarely indulged in, often catching a few hours on the worn sofa in her cramped apartment before the cycle began anew. Yet, despite the relentless grind, Elena possessed an inner resilience, a quiet dignity that refused to be extinguished. She took pride in her work, transforming chaos into order with methodical precision. Each polished surface, each gleaming floor, was a small victory in her seemingly endless battle against the entropy of the world. Tonight, the mess was particularly egregious. The charity gala had been a boisterous affair, attended by the city's elite, their laughter and chatter now replaced by an eerie silence that amplified every swish of her mop and every clang of a discarded bottle hitting her waste bin. She started in the main ballroom, an opulent space adorned with crystal chandeliers that now seemed to mock the debris scattered beneath them. Glitter, the bane of every cleaner's existence, clung to the plush carpet like a tenacious plague, reflecting the dim emergency lights in 1,000 tiny, irritating pinpricks. Elena sighed, a soft, almost inaudible sound, and began her meticulous work. Her routine was a well-rehearsed dance: clear the tables, empty the bins, sweep, mop, polish. Each step was muscle memory, performed with an efficiency born of long practice. The air was thick with the ghost of celebration, a heady mix of expensive cologne, wilting floral arrangements, and the underlying sharpness of spilled wine. Elena moved with a quiet determination, her mind drifting to Matteo's upcoming school project, a diorama of the solar system that required an impossible array of glitter and styrofoam balls. She smiled faintly, a fleeting expression that softened the tired lines around her eyes. Matteo was her anchor, her reason for enduring the long nights and the thankless tasks. He was a bright, curious boy, and she was determined to give him a better life than her own. As she worked her way towards the grand foyer, the main entrance area where guests had once spilled out of luxury cars, a faint, metallic scent began to mingle with the other odors. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but as she approached the heavy oak doors that led to the loading dock, it grew stronger. The smell of oil, leather, and something else, something uniquely human, like sweat and a hint of ozone. It was out of place in the elegant, sterile environment she was striving to create. Her brow furrowed slightly. Usually, by this hour, the building was completely empty save for the night security guard, a kindly elderly man named Arthur, who was usually stationed at the main front desk. She pushed open the heavy double doors leading to a less-used side corridor, a service route typically reserved for deliveries and staff. The air here was cooler, tinged with the dampness of the pre-dawn hours. And there, slumped against a stack of empty crates near a fire exit, was a figure that made Elena pause, her heart giving a sudden, unwelcome lurch. The man was an imposing presence, even in his current state of apparent exhaustion or distress. He was a Hell's Angel, unmistakable even to someone like Elena who had only ever seen such individuals in gritty documentaries or on the news. His black leather vest, heavy and worn, was adorned with the infamous death head patch prominently displayed on his back, its menacing skull and wings a stark declaration of allegiance. Other smaller patches, testament to chapters and perhaps deeds unknown to outsiders, covered the vest's front. His arms, thick with muscle, were a canvas of intricate tattoos, coiling dragons and fierce beasts interwoven with lettering that snaked up to his neck. A long, dark beard, streaked with gray, framed a face that looked etched with 1,000 untold stories, each line a testament to a life lived on the edge. His hair, equally long and dark, was pulled back in a loose, low ponytail, but strands had escaped, framing a face that was grimaced in discomfort. He was massive, easily twice Elena's size, and the sheer bulk of him radiated an aura of raw, untamed power, even as he sat hunched. A heavy silver chain glinted around his neck, partially hidden beneath his beard. His eyes, when they finally flickered open and met hers, were a startling shade of blue, sharp and surprisingly intelligent, but now clouded with a deep weariness. They held a flicker of surprise, perhaps even a hint of annoyance, at being discovered. He was wearing heavy leather gloves, even indoors, and his right hand was clasped tightly around his left arm, just above the elbow. Elena noticed a dark, damp patch on his sleeve there, a stain that seemed too dark to be just dirt. Blood. A fresh, unsettling realization solidified in her mind. A large, custom-built motorcycle, a Harley-Davidson by the looks of it, was parked nearby, leaning against the wall, its chrome gleaming dully in the low light. It was a machine of formidable beauty and power, clearly well-maintained, but it looked out of place in the quiet service corridor of the Grand Assembly Hall. The atmosphere was suddenly charged with an unspoken tension. Elena, usually so invisible, felt acutely seen, scrutinized by those piercing blue eyes. Her first instinct was to retreat, to pretend she hadn't seen him, to continue her work and hope he would simply disappear. This was not her problem. This was dangerous territory, far removed from the safe predictability of cleaning spilled wine and vacuuming glitter. But then, she noticed the slight tremor in his hand as he clutched his arm, the way his jaw was clenched, a muscle working visibly beneath the stubble. His breathing was shallow, a barely audible rasp in the silence. He wasn't just tired, he was in pain, and perhaps weakened. The intimidating facade, while still present, was momentarily cracked, revealing a flicker of vulnerability. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to override her initial fear. Elena had seen enough suffering in her life, in her mother's eyes, in the quiet desperation of her own reflection, to recognize it in others, regardless of their outward appearance or reputation. She took a slow, deep breath, her grip tightening almost imperceptibly on the handle of her mop. She was just a cleaning lady, armed with nothing but a bucket and a mop, confronting a man who embodied everything dangerous and untamed. Yet, a different kind of courage, one born of empathy rather than recklessness, stirred within her. She remembered Mateo's scraped knee last week, the way he'd bravely tried to hide his tears, and the immediate, overwhelming urge she'd felt to alleviate his pain, no matter how small. This man was not her son, but the raw, unmasked pain in his eyes resonated with something deeply human within her. Without a word, she gently lowered her mop and bucket, the small clatter echoing loudly in the stillness. She walked over to her cleaning cart, rummaging through a compartment where she kept a small, personal thermos of water and a few emergency snacks. It was her own supply, a necessity for the long, arduous nights. She pulled out a fresh, unopened bottle of mineral water. It was cool to the touch, condensation beating on its plastic surface. She held it out to him, her hand steady despite the rapid thump of her heart. "You look like you could use this," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, a soft murmur in the echoing corridor. She didn't ask what was wrong, didn't pry into his injury or his presence here. She simply offered. It was a gesture of pure, unadulterated kindness, devoid of judgment or expectation. The Hell's Angel's eyes, those striking blue eyes, widened almost imperceptibly. He stared at the bottle, then at her face, a flicker of something unreadable passing through them. Surprise? Suspicion? He didn't move for a long moment, the silence stretching between them, thick with unspoken questions and the weight of their vastly different worlds colliding in this improbable corner of the night. His gaze was intense, searching, as if trying to decipher her motives, to find the hidden agenda behind such a simple, humane offering. Elena simply held the bottle out, her arm unwavering, her expression gentle but firm. She wasn't afraid of him, not anymore. She was simply a human being offering help to another. Finally, very slowly, he extended his uninjured left hand. His fingers, thick and calloused, wrapped around the cool bottle, his touch surprisingly gentle. The small gesture felt monumental, a bridge built across a chasm of social divides and preconceived notions. He didn't say thank you, not verbally, but the slight relaxation in his shoulders, the almost imperceptible softening of his gaze, spoke volumes. He took a long, deep swallow, the water disappearing rapidly down his throat. The sound of his gulping was loud in the quiet corridor, a raw, animalistic thirst being quenched. He drank until the bottle was half empty, then lowered it, a sigh escaping his lips. It was a sound of immense relief, of a burden momentarily eased. He looked at her again, those blue eyes now holding a different light, a quiet acknowledgement. Elena gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent understanding passing between them. She knew she had done the right thing. She turned away then, picking up her mop and bucket, and continued her work, leaving him to his solitude and his water. The metallic scent of blood was still there, but now it was overshadowed by the quiet dignity of a moment of unexpected human connection. She moved further down the corridor, her back to him, leaving him with his thoughts, the cool water, and the knowledge that in the darkest hours, even the most invisible among us can offer a beacon of compassion. The cleaning lady, a woman who meticulously erased the traces of other people's lives, had, for a brief moment, left an indelible mark on a man who lived outside the rules, a man whose world was undoubtedly far more unforgiving than her own. She pushed her cart, the squeak of the wheels now seeming less lonely, more purposeful. The night was still long, and there was much more to clean, but something had shifted. An unspoken pact, a silent understanding, had been forged in the quiet, forgotten corner of a city building, between two souls who, under normal circumstances, would have never even crossed paths. The world outside this corridor, with its expectations and its judgments, felt distant, irrelevant. Here, in the dim light, only the simple act of human kindness mattered. She continued her cleaning, sweeping away the last fragments of the gala's exuberance, the glitter and confetti now seeming less irritating, more like remnants of a distant dream. Her mind, however, kept drifting back to the Hell's Angel, to the unexpected vulnerability she had witnessed, and the quiet gratitude in his eyes. What would become of him? Where would he go from here? These were not questions for a cleaning lady. Her job was to make things clean, to restore order. Yet, the image of him, slumped against the crates, the dark patch on his sleeve, lingered. It was a stark reminder of the hidden struggles that often lay beneath the surface, beneath the glittering facade of society. She wondered if he would remember her, the quiet woman who had offered him water in the dead of night. It was unlikely, she thought. She was just a cleaning lady. But for her, the encounter was already etched into the fabric of her memory, a small, yet profound, deviation from her monotonous routine. The cool plastic of the water bottle, the glint of his silver chain, the surprising blue of his eyes, these details played over and over in her mind, a silent, internal cinema of an unexpected human interaction. The night was still young, and the city slept, unaware of the quiet drama that had unfolded in its forgotten corners. Elena pushed on, her mop swishing rhythmically, leaving behind a trail of clean, damp floor, and carrying within her the weight of a secret, a moment of connection that transcended worlds. Elena's hands moved automatically, guiding the mop in wide, practiced arcs across the polished marble. The rhythmic swish-swish of the wet fabric against the floor was usually a soothing sound, a testament to order being restored. But tonight, it felt hollow, a flimsy shield against the unsettling memory that refused to recede. The image of the Hell's Angel, slumped against the crates, his face a grim mask of pain, his eyes a startling, weary blue, was seared into her mind. And the blood, that dark, damp stain on his sleeve, it pulsed behind her eyelids with every blink. She was just a cleaning lady. Her job was to clean, to erase, to make things disappear. Not to get involved. Not to confront danger. Her life was already complicated enough, a precarious balance of work, bills, and the relentless pursuit of a better future for Matteo. What had possessed her to offer water to a man who, by all appearances, belonged to a world she could barely comprehend, a world steeped in violence and lawlessness? Fear had been her first instinct, a cold knot in her stomach urging her to retreat, to ignore, to forget. But then, that flicker of vulnerability, that shared human pain, had cut through her defenses. It was a silent plea for help, stripped bare of all the intimidating trappings, and it had resonated deeply within her. Now, a different kind of fear began to creep in. Not the fear of him, but the fear of consequences. What if he was involved in something dangerous? What if his injury wasn't accidental? What if someone was looking for him? And what if her small act of kindness was misinterpreted, drawing her unwittingly into his perilous orbit? Her mind raced, conjuring scenarios born from crime dramas she sometimes caught glimpses of on TV. A cleaning lady, witness to a Hell's Angel's distress. It sounded like the beginning of a story she definitely didn't want to be a part of. The corridor she was now cleaning felt colder, longer, more exposed. Every shadow seemed to deepen, every creak of the old building settling seemed to amplify into a warning. She glanced over her shoulder, a nervous habit she'd picked up from working alone in the dead of night. The corridor where she had left him was still quiet, seemingly undisturbed. But the silence itself felt charged, heavy with unspoken possibilities. She pushed her cart further, trying to focus on the task at hand, to lose herself in the monotonous rhythm of her work. But her thoughts kept circling back. The way his thick fingers had gently wrapped around the water bottle. The profound relief in his sigh. It wasn't the reaction of a hardened criminal, or at least, not entirely. It was the reaction of a man in genuine distress, parched and weakened. She found herself wondering about the source of his injury. A fight? An accident? The questions swirled, unsettling her carefully constructed peace. A growing sense of unease began to prick at her. She had left him there, injured and alone. What if he truly needed more help? What if the wound was serious? Her conscience, that quiet, insistent voice, began to speak louder than her fear. She had seen the dark patch, the unmistakable crimson seeping through his sleeve. It wasn't just a scrape. It was a significant wound. She finished cleaning the stretch of corridor she was on, her movements becoming less fluid, more hesitant. Her eyes kept darting towards the heavy oak doors, the ones that led back to where he was. The rational part of her screamed to continue her route, to head towards the staff exit, to simply forget what she had seen. To protect herself, and by extension, Mateo. But the other part, the part that had offered the water, refused to be silenced. It was the part that remembered her mother's frail hand, Mateo's scraped knee, the inherent human need to alleviate suffering. Taking another deep breath, Elena made a decision that felt both foolish and inevitable. She couldn't just leave him. Not knowing he was injured. Not after the quiet moment of connection they had shared. She wouldn't call the authorities. That felt like a betrayal of the silent trust that had passed between them. Besides, she had no idea what kind of trouble that would bring down on her, or on him. Her only thought was that he might need more than just water. A bandage, perhaps. Something to stem the bleeding. She turned her cart around, the squeak of its wheels now sounding like a bold declaration in the vast emptiness of the hull. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat urging her forward, yet simultaneously holding her back. As she approached the heavy oak doors, she hesitated, her hand hovering over the cold metal handle. What if he was gone? What if he was worse? What if he was angry she had returned? She pushed the door open slowly, a sliver of light from the main corridor spilling into the dim service area. Her eyes scanned the space, searching for the imposing figure. The custom-built Harley-Davidson was still there, a dark, gleaming silhouette against the wall. But the stack of crates where he had been slumped was empty. He was gone. A wave of both relief and disappointment washed over her. Relief, because the immediate danger was past. Disappointment, because she hadn't been able to help further, and a strange sense of something unfinished lingered. She walked slowly into the cold, damp corridor, her gaze sweeping the area. No trace of him, save for a faint, lingering scent of leather and oil, and something else, a metallic tang that was now barely perceptible. The bottle of water she had given him was gone too. At least he had taken the water. That was something. Just as she was about to turn back, convinced he had simply left, her eyes caught something on the floor, tucked into the shadow of the crates. It was small, glinting dully in the low light. She knelt, her fingers brushing against the cold concrete. It was a small, silver charm, intricately carved into the shape of a winged skull. The Hell's Angel symbol. It must have fallen from his vest or chain. He had left it behind. A shiver ran down her spine. Was it accidental? Or a deliberate gesture? A warning? A thank you? She picked it up, the metal cool against her fingertips. It felt heavy, substantial, imbued with a strange power. She looked at it for a long moment, then instinctively closed her hand around it, tucking it into the pocket of her smock. It felt like a secret, a tangible link to the improbable encounter. As she resumed her cleaning route, the silence of the hall no longer felt empty, but watchful. The small silver charm in her pocket felt like a burning coal, a constant reminder of the Hell's Angel and the world he represented. Her thoughts drifted from Mateo's school project to the intricate tattoos on his arms, from her mother's medical bills to the surprising blue of his eyes. Her orderly, predictable world had been momentarily fractured by this encounter, and the fragments were now refusing to settle back into place. The rest of her shift passed in a blur of methodical motions, her body working while her mind replayed the scene over and over. By the time Arthur, the kindly night guard, arrived to relieve her, the sun was just beginning to paint the sky in hues of soft pink and orange. He greeted her with his usual warm smile, completely oblivious to the silent drama that had unfolded hours earlier. Elena managed a tired smile in return, her secret safe in her pocket. As she walked home through the waking city, the silver charm still clutched in her hand inside her pocket, she felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. The encounter had not escalated, he was gone, and she was safe. But the feeling of being watched, of having stepped across an invisible line, persisted. When she finally unlocked the door to her small apartment, the first thing she did was pull out the charm. It was a finely crafted piece, detailed and heavy. She placed it on her worn bedside table, next to a framed photo of Mateo, a stark contrast between two worlds. The next day, Elena tried to push the incident from her mind, but it was impossible. Every time she reached into her pocket, her fingers brushed against the cool metal of the charm. She found herself subconsciously scanning faces in the street, looking for long beards, leather vests, or a particular shade of blue eyes. It was a foolish endeavor, she knew, but she couldn't help herself. The encounter had awakened something within her, a curiosity about the hidden lives that intersected with her own, however briefly. A week passed. The memory of the Hell's Angel remained vivid, but slowly, the sharp edges of the anxiety began to soften. She told herself it was a one-time thing, a strange anomaly in her otherwise mundane existence. She focused on Mateo, helping him with his solar system diorama, gluing tiny planets onto wire hangers. She focused on her mother, ensuring her appointments were kept, her medicines taken. Life, in its relentless way, continued. Then, one evening, as she was preparing dinner, there was a knock on her apartment door. It wasn't Mateo, who had a key, nor her mother, who was already inside. It was a firm, deliberate knock, not aggressive, but undeniably present. Her heart leaped into her throat. She rarely had visitors. Most of her neighbors were quiet, elderly people. A cold dread began to coil in her stomach. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Her breath hitched. Standing on her small landing, framed by the dim light of the hallway, was a man. He was tall, powerfully built, and dressed in a dark leather jacket. His face was partially obscured by shadow and a heavy, dark beard, streaked with gray. But there was no mistaking the piercing blue eyes that seemed to bore directly into her through the peephole. It was him. The Hell's Angel. He was holding something in his hand, something small and white. A single, pristine white rose. It looked incongruous, almost absurd, in his large, tattooed hand. He didn't speak, just stood there, his gaze unwavering, projecting a silent, formidable presence that filled the narrow hallway. Elena froze. 1,000 thoughts crashed through her mind. How had he found her? Why was he here? Was this a threat? A thank you? Her mind screamed at her not to open the door, to pretend she wasn't home, to let him leave. But her hand, almost against her will, reached for the lock. The quiet dignity she possessed, the same empathy that had led her to offer him water, now compelled her to face whatever this unexpected visit entailed. She slowly unlatched the door, opening it just a crack, leaving the security chain in place. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a reedy whisper, barely audible even to her own ears. She tried to sound calm, but her hands were trembling. His blue eyes, now clearer and less weary than she remembered, held hers. "I believe this belongs to you," he rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly sound that vibrated through the door. He extended his hand, and in his palm, nestled beside the white rose, was the silver-winged skull charm. Her charm. The one she had placed on her bedside table, the one she thought she had kept secret. Elena stared at the charm, then at the rose, then back at his face. Her mind struggled to process this surreal moment. He had come to return it. And he had brought a rose. This was not the kind of interaction she had ever imagined having with a Hell's Angel. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mingled with a profound sense of bewilderment and a strange, almost reluctant curiosity. How did you find me?" she managed, her voice still thin. A faint, almost imperceptible smirk touched the corner of his lips, a fleeting expression that softened the hard lines of his face for a split second. "Information travels," he said, his gaze flicking briefly towards the doorframe, then back to her. "Especially when someone does a good deed." His eyes held a depth she couldn't fathom, a mixture of gratitude and something else, something she couldn't quite place. It wasn't menacing, but it was certainly powerful. He pushed the rose and the charm gently towards the crack in the door. "Consider this a small token of appreciation," he continued, his voice still low. "For the water. And for not asking questions." His emphasis on not asking questions was subtle, yet clear. It was a reminder of the unspoken pact, a boundary laid out. Elena hesitated. Taking the charm back, accepting the rose, it felt like an acceptance of something more, an acknowledgement of a connection she wasn't sure she wanted. But refusing felt rude, almost defiant. And defiance towards a Hell's Angel felt like a very bad idea. She slowly unhooked the security chain, her hand shaking slightly, and opened the door wider. He stepped back slightly, giving her space. He was immense, filling the doorway, radiating a raw power that made her feel small and vulnerable. His leather jacket, adorned with patches she didn't recognize, seemed to absorb the dim light. He still had the heavy silver chain around his neck, and his arms were still a canvas of intricate tattoos. He looked fully recovered from his injury, the weariness gone from his eyes, replaced by a keen, unwavering intensity. She reached out, her fingers brushing his as she took the rose and the charm. The rose was soft, its petals cool and velvety. The charm was indeed hers, the same one she had found. "Thank you," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate for the weight of the moment. He simply nodded, his gaze lingering on her for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "My name is Jax," he said, his voice softer now, almost conversational. "If you ever need anything." He didn't elaborate, didn't specify what anything might entail. The offer hung in the air, open-ended and heavy with unspoken implications. Elena looked at him, at this man from a completely different world, standing on her doorstep, offering her a white rose and a vague promise of help. Her mind reeled. This was far beyond a simple act of kindness in a deserted corridor. This was a direct, personal contact, a bridge built between two lives that should never have intersected. The quiet life she had meticulously constructed, the one she fought so hard to maintain for Matteo, suddenly felt fragile, exposed. Before she could formulate a response, he turned, a fluid, powerful movement, and walked away. He didn't look back. Elena watched him descend the creaking stairs, his heavy boots echoing in the stairwell. Only when she heard the faint sound of a motorcycle engine starting up in the street below, a low, throaty rumble that vibrated through the walls of her apartment building, did she finally close the door. She leaned against it, the rose and the charm clutched to her chest, her heart still pounding. Jax. A Hell's Angel. He knew where she lived. He had brought her a rose. The implications of this visit were immense, terrifying, and utterly bewildering. Her safe, invisible world had just been shattered, and her safe, invisible world had just been shattered, and a terrifying, exhilarating new reality was beginning to unfold. The white rose, a symbol of purity and new beginnings, felt heavy in her hand, a stark contrast to the silver charm that represented a world of danger and power. She thought of Mateo, sleeping soundly in his room, oblivious to the seismic shift that had just occurred at their doorstep. How could she protect him when her own life had become so unpredictably intertwined with the Hell's Angel? Days blurred into weeks. Elena tried to compartmentalize the encounter, to tuck it away in a forgotten corner of her mind, but it was impossible. The silver charm, now sitting on her bedside table, glinted mockingly in the morning light. The white rose, carefully placed in a small vase, slowly wilted, its beauty fading, yet its presence a constant, silent reminder. She found herself glancing at the door, listening for the faint rumble of a motorcycle, her heart quickening at every unexpected sound. Her carefully constructed routine, once a source of comfort, now felt like a fragile facade, easily dismantled. The implications of Jax's visit weighed heavily on her. He knew where she lived. He had offered help. What kind of help? And what would be the cost? Her mind, always practical, raced through scenarios. Mateo needed new school supplies, his worn backpack was falling apart. Her mother's specialist appointment was coming up, and the copay alone was daunting. These were mundane problems, yet they felt insurmountable. Could she really call on a Hell's Angel for such things? The thought was absurd, yet the offer, vague as it was, created a tiny crack in her wall of self-reliance. She continued her cleaning jobs, pushing her cart through the silent halls of the Grand Assembly, the squeak of its wheels now imbued with a new, unsettling resonance. Every shadow seemed to hold a secret, every quiet corridor a potential encounter. She saw Arthur, the night guard, and wondered what he would say if he knew. She kept her secret locked away, a burden that felt both heavy and strangely empowering. The charm in her pocket, which she sometimes carried, was a tangible link to a world she didn't understand, a world that had suddenly reached out and touched hers. One afternoon, Elena was at her part-time diner job, wiping down tables, when she overheard a conversation that sent a chill down her spine. Two well-dressed men, regulars who often discussed local politics and social events, were talking about a major charity auction scheduled to take place at the Grand Assembly Hall in a few weeks. It was to be the biggest event of the season, attracting the wealthiest and most influential people in the city. The mayor himself was expected to attend. And then, one of the men casually mentioned a rumor: a rival biker gang, known for its disruptive tactics, had been seen in the city, causing minor disturbances, and there were whispers of them trying to muscle in on local protection rackets, even targeting high-profile events. Elena's blood ran cold. The Grand Assembly Hall. A high-profile event. Protection rackets. The words echoed in her mind, forming a terrifying mosaic. Could Jax be involved? Was this why he had been injured? And was she, by extension, now somehow connected to this dangerous underworld? She finished her shift in a daze, the clatter of plates and the chatter of customers fading into a distant hum. The next few weeks were fraught with an undercurrent of anxiety. Elena was, as expected, scheduled to work the post-event cleanup for the charity auction. It was her busiest, most lucrative shift, but now it was overshadowed by a creeping dread. She found herself double-checking locks, walking home with a heightened sense of awareness. She even considered calling in sick, a desperate thought she quickly dismissed. She needed the money. Mateo's school trip was coming up, and her mother's new medication was expensive. The day of the auction arrived, a crisp autumn evening. The city hummed with anticipation. Elena arrived at the Grand Assembly Hall just as the first guests began to trickle in, their luxury cars pulling up to the main entrance. She moved through the service corridors, a ghost among the living, preparing her cart, her stomach a tight knot of nerves. The air was thick with excitement, the scent of expensive perfumes and fresh flowers already filling the opulent spaces. She saw the extra security guards, their presence a subtle acknowledgement of the underlying tension. Her role was to stay in the background, to keep the service areas clean and stocked, and to begin the initial cleanup in less used areas as the event progressed. As the night wore on, the main ballroom filled with laughter and the clinking of glasses. Elena worked diligently, emptying bins, wiping down surfaces in the staff kitchen, trying to calm her racing heart. She kept glancing towards the service entrance, half expecting, half dreading, to see Jax. Around midnight, as the auction reached its peak, a sudden disturbance rippled through the hall. Not a loud commotion, but a subtle shift in the atmosphere. Whispers spread, security guards moved with a new urgency. Elena, in the main corridor, saw it first. 3 imposing figures, clad in leather, but not the familiar Hell's Angel patches. These were different, more aggressive, their faces scowling, their movements overtly confrontational. They pushed past a bewildered security guard, making their way towards the main ballroom, clearly intent on causing trouble. A cold fear gripped Elena. This was it. The rival gang. They were here. She instinctively retreated further into the shadows, her hand clutching the silver charm in her pocket, a desperate, silent prayer on her lips. She wanted to call for help, to warn someone, but her voice was stuck in her throat. Just as the 3 men reached the grand archway leading into the ballroom, a new presence emerged from the main entrance, cutting through the hushed tension like a knife. He was unmistakable. Jax. Clad in his full Hell's Angel regalia, his heavy leather vest bearing the infamous death head patch, his long beard and tattooed arms a formidable display. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, 2 other Hell's Angels, equally imposing, followed, their faces grim, their presence radiating an undeniable, raw power. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. The elegant chatter died down, replaced by an eerie silence. Everyone turned, their eyes wide with shock and disbelief. A Hell's Angel at a high society charity gala? It was an image ripped from a different reality. The rival gang members froze, their bravado visibly deflating at the sight of the Hell's Angels. The air crackled with unspoken tension, a silent standoff between 2 opposing forces. Jax's piercing blue eyes swept the room, taking in the shocked faces, the bewildered security guards. And then, his gaze landed on Elena, standing half-hidden in the shadows of the corridor. A flicker of acknowledgement passed between them, a silent understanding. He gave her a subtle, almost imperceptible nod, a reassurance that only she could comprehend. He then turned his attention to the rival gang. His voice, when he spoke, was a low rumble that somehow carried through the vast hall, cutting through the silence. "This is our territory," he stated, his words not a question, but a cold, hard declaration. "You don't belong here." The leader of the rival gang, a burly man with a scar running down his cheek, tried to retort, "We're just here for a little fun." But his voice lacked conviction, his eyes darting nervously between Jax and his 2 companions. Jax took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving the rival leader. "The fun's over," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Leave. Now. Or face the consequences." The threat was clear, unequivocal. The rival gang leader hesitated for a moment, weighing his options. 3 against 3, but the Hell's Angels carried a reputation that preceded them. And Jax, in particular, exuded an aura of unyielding authority. With a frustrated snarl, he nodded to his men, and they turned, retreating swiftly, their earlier bravado completely evaporated. The security guards, caught off guard, could only watch as the rival gang melted back into the night. A collective sigh of relief swept through the ballroom. The guests, still visibly shaken, began to murmur, a mixture of fear and awe in their voices. The mayor, who had been on stage, quickly stepped forward to thank Jax, but the Hell's Angel simply raised a hand, cutting him off. Jax's gaze once again found Elena. He walked towards her, his heavy boots echoing on the marble floor. The guests parted for him, a river of elegant dresses and tuxedos making way for the imposing biker. Elena's heart hammered, but this time, it was a mixture of fear and a strange sense of vindication. He had come. He had intervened. He stopped in front of her, his towering figure casting her in shadow. "Everything all right?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for her ears. Elena, still breathless, managed a shaky nod. "Yes. Thank you, Jax." He gave another one of his rare, almost imperceptible smirks. "You look like you're still working hard." He glanced at her cart, then back at her. "Heard you had a son who needed school supplies." And a mother with medical bills. Elena's eyes widened. He knew. He hadn't just offered vague help, he had been watching. The realization sent a shiver down her spine, but it wasn't entirely fear. It was also a profound sense of being seen, truly seen, for the first time in a very long time. How did you know? She whispered. Information travels, he repeated, the same words he had used at her doorstep. He reached into the inner pocket of his vest and pulled out a thick envelope. This should help with the school supplies and the medical bills, he said, pressing it into her hand. No questions asked. Elena stared at the envelope, then at him. Her fingers trembled as she held it. It was thick, clearly containing a substantial amount of money. This was far beyond what she could have imagined. This was a lifeline. Jax, I can't, she began, her voice cracking. I can't take this. He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping even lower. Consider it a payment for services rendered. We keep this city safe, and sometimes, that comes with unexpected benefits. You did me a good turn. This is me returning it. And for your silence, of course. His blue eyes held hers, a silent, powerful command. It was not a request, it was a non-negotiable exchange. Elena knew she couldn't refuse. Not just because of the implied power in his gaze, but because of Mateo, and her mother. This money could change everything. It wasn't charity, it was a transaction, an unspoken pact. She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Thank you, she managed, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Jax. He simply nodded in return. Take care, Elena. He paused, his gaze softening almost imperceptibly. And tell Mateo that sometimes, the best lessons aren't found in books, but in the most unexpected places. With that, he turned, his two companions falling in behind him. They walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall, leaving behind a stunned silence and a cleaning lady clutching an envelope that represented a new beginning. The guests watched them go, a mixture of awe, relief, and lingering fear on their faces. The mayor, still on stage, looked utterly bewildered, his speech long forgotten. Elena stood there for a long moment, the envelope clutched tightly in her hand, the silver charm still warm in her pocket. The Grand Assembly Hall, usually a symbol of a world she merely served, now felt different. It was still opulent, still filled with glitter and expensive perfume, but now it also held the echo of a Hell's Angel's voice, a silent declaration of protection, and an act of profound, if dangerous, kindness. The next morning, Elena deposited a significant portion of the money into her savings account, enough to cover Mateo's school trip, new clothes, and a substantial part of her mother's medical bills. She bought Mateo the most elaborate solar system diorama kit she could find, complete with glowing planets and a miniature astronaut. The look on his face, pure unadulterated joy, was worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. Her mother, too, noticed the difference, the subtle relaxation in Elena's shoulders, the absence of the constant worry etched on her face. Elena continued her cleaning jobs, but now, her perspective had shifted. The corridors of the Grand Assembly Hall no longer felt lonely or invisible. They held a secret, a memory of a powerful connection forged in the shadows. The squeak of her cart's wheels no longer sounded like a lament, but a quiet, purposeful rhythm. She was still a cleaning lady, still erasing the traces of others' lives, but she was no longer just a phantom presence. She carried a secret strength, a knowledge that she had been seen, valued, and protected by a man from a world she never thought she'd touch. She never saw Jax again in person, not directly. But sometimes, when she was working late, she would catch the faint, distant rumble of a powerful motorcycle in the streets outside, a low, throaty purr that seemed to vibrate through the very foundations of the city. And she knew. She knew he was out there, a silent guardian in the urban night, a shadow figure who had, for one unforgettable moment, stepped into her light and changed her life forever. The white rose had long since withered, but the silver charm, kept safely tucked away, remained a tangible reminder of the day the cleaning lady gave water to a Hell's Angel, and how, in the most shocking of circumstances, he had given her a new lease on life. Her world, once small and predictable, had expanded, imbued with a dangerous beauty and an unexpected promise of protection. She was no longer just Elena, the cleaning lady, she was Elena, the woman who had dared to show kindness, and for that, she had gained an unlikely ally in the heart of a city that rarely noticed the invisible.